if you need to. And remember, there's an EAP for you, but there's also 1-800-RESPECT. So just look after yourself, please. Look, the session 1 and session 2, you remember that we went through the AGPC policy. Hopefully you've had a little bit of a chance to know that that exists, and that will be, like all policies of all good organisations, continuously improved as new ideas come to ground. And we introduced the foundational concepts of gendered patterns and gendered stereotypes, and Lex shared something she noticed on the weekend, and hopefully you're starting to notice those things too. But I know for some of you, you've already been noticing those things, but those are kind of those core foundations. It's the toxicity of stereotypes. Session 2, we kind of introduced the change the story, which is the body of knowledge, and we'll go into that a little bit more today, because that not only says about what the drivers are, which we went through, and the impacts, but it also actually says the good news, which is that violence is preventable. But today we're going to get down into the nitty-gritty of bystander and responding to disclosures and how we want to go about creating change. So whereas the first 2 sessions were more theoretical based, today is really the nuts and bolts about how we as individuals can make a difference. But here's the thing, like I started talking at the start of the session about a reticular activating system, when you again understand these ways of making change, I don't know about you, but some of these concepts of bystander action, you can apply to advocacy, you can apply to inter-organisational change, you can apply to a whole range of things like that. Some of you have also asked us, look, if I do get a disclosure, what is the best way for me to handle that? So we're going to go through that today. And again, just to reiterate that this is all available evidence for you on the public domain. There is no state secrets here, all right? So as we go through, we'll try to share those links for you as well, but follow up with our Lex and Maristella to share them with you as well. But hopefully we're just giving you an introduction to make it easier for you too. So thank you so much. Lex has just put the EAP by LifeWorks in there as well. But is there anything that you want to make sure that I cover and Lula cover today? Sing it as we go. You're probably just waking up, getting into the day, getting your first caffeinated beverage, legalised stimulant in your blood system. That's okay. What we'll do is we'll keep carrying on. If anything comes up, just, you know, you can feel free to ask at any time, don't you? Yeah, okay. All right, let's recap what happened. So if you remember when we met last week, we talked about some of the framework that Change the Story has come together to say this is why violence happens. This is why violence against women happens. This is why domestic abuse happens. This is why family violence occurs. The first thing is it's the social context, right? The broad social context is gender inequality and other forms of oppression. The fact that the canvas that we all live, breathe and work on sets up power differences, sets up these stereotypes which police difference, which police power, which police and force people into ways of being. And it makes one sex, one gender seem preferable to another. And it occurs through all the other things. But not only that, race, it's the intersectionality we talked about, if you remember that. Race, homophobia, racism, ageism, all those things come together to actually set up that inequality. That's the sort of the social context. And then on top of that, we layer these drivers, and Lula spoke through those, is the condoning of violence, sort of the acceptance of it, sort of the saying that's okay. And one of the things that we do when we say that, remember, if we look at things like movies, I don't know about you, but there was a really famous TV series called The Game of Thrones. Did anyone watch that? I didn't watch it because I actually can't watch anything that's got blood or kids being hurt in it or cats or, you know, I'm sort of Midsummer Murders on reruns type of girl. But a lot of people watched it, and I I noticed a lot of people commented about the violence in that and the acceptance of that violence. And I noticed that there's a new Game of Thrones coming out soon, a prequel, where they have made a deliberate attempt to not do that in the show. Right? So they've learned from that. Men's control of decision-making and limit.
Sorry, Kit, just to
yes.
interrupt.
Yes.
That noise coming from someone. I don't know
if
everyone else is hearing that, but
I'll just if people are on, you put yourself on mute, that will be Thank you, Elise, for letting me know. Yeah, I heard that too. So when we talk about men's decision and limits, it's not only about our, it can be from anything from money, control of money, through to the structural and systemic pathways that persistently prevent women being in positions of power. But let's be honest, gay men outgay men, women of colour, men of colour, being in positions of diverse positions of power as well. But really what Change the Story said, look, when you limit women's independence in public and private life, that is a gender driver as well. We come to the toxicity of stereotypings. Girls will be girls and boys will be both. Bad, 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 bad. It sets up stereotypes, it limits choices, we police it structurally and systemically. And finally, those peer relations and cultures of masculinity that emphasize aggression. Yeah, dominance and control. So, you know, like, I don't know when you were growing up, but I went to the VFL, that'll show my age, into the MCG, when it was all the Waverley, when it was all the big grey things. And I remember sitting there with my uncle, who was a goal umpire at the time, and just hearing this abuse being hurled. And now, of course, at the AFL, we try to police it. There's more women there as well. So when we try to encourage or don't take steps to stop that, that's, I think, I don't know if anyone else has got examples that they want to share of those drivers, but that's the living example of what happens there. But on top of it, what actually a Change the Story says, there's reinforcing factors, and this came up from us last week, when we have the general condoning of violence against women, when we don't take deliberate steps to stop it. Many of you will recall things like Brittany Higgins coming out, when that was not called out. That was actually a really bad thing, because not calling out one poor behaviour actually gives permission for it all to happen. When we have experience and exposure to violence, we know growing up, we know in the community, we know that is a reinforcing factor to reinforce the drivers. When we have factors that weaken pro-social behaviours. Does everyone understand what I mean by pro-social behaviour? Pro-social behaviour is behaviour that keeps crudely society in harmony. It's the behaviours that encourage us to treat everyone equally, to support everyone, to accept difference. So when we have factors that weaken that, that's a reinforcing factor. Can anyone think of something where that occurs? Might be an example, but the pub, even when you see people not being called to account for their behaviours, it might be if you're sitting in a conversation and someone says something that's not called out, that is a very small factor that weakens pro-social behaviours, but we'll be going on to that in just a second. But then you have them systemically and structurally. Leaders giving permission for others to act poorly. And no greater example of that was during the 2021, when you had in our federal parliament the lack of strong action taken to prevent the sexual harassment and bullying in that workplace. That was a factor to weaken pro-social behaviour in a workplace, writ large. Finally, when we have resistance and backlash to prevention and gender equality efforts, the reality is that any gender equality and prevention of violence work creates backlash, right? That's actually true. That's what happens. And that can be as subtle as you might start a conversation where you start to talk about equality and someone might say, oh God, here we go again. That's a form of resistance and backlash. through to the structural and systemic ones that occur. So I don't know if any of you recall the Repco ads, where the advertisements were on television showing scantily clad women advertising car parts. And the MD of that organisation deliberately came out and said words and copy that was a backlash towards people, community trying to call out another one of those drivers, which is rigid gender stereotyping of masculinity and femininity. He said, well, people buy when I advertise this. That was his backlash to the feedback. So we have drivers and we have reinforcers. But the good news, here's the good news, is that actually violence against women, family violence and domestic abuse is actually preventable. So I don't know if there's a woman called Natasha Stott-Despoja. Have you heard of her? She started Our Watch. She was a senator. She's now on the Commission for the Status of Women, CEDAW. And if ever you hear her speak, she says this like a broken record. The good news is that violence against women, family violence, is preventable. And that's the job that Lula or I are in, is to spread that. And that's what we're here to do today. So we've given you the theory, we've given you the understanding. And change the story is the framework that tells us how that occurs. And there are so many options. Pretty overwhelming, isn't it? Look at all that choice. Now, AGPC are doing some of these already. The Gender Equality Act work is the middle one, the actions for the social context. Gender Equality Act is asking to you, but my experience of your leaders and team and your colleagues is that there is genuine goodwill to promote and normalise gender equality in your organisation. You took the flag girls or whatever they call off the grid. That was a deliberate attempt in public life to stop the stereotypes. You're doing it, right? You are consciously aware of the moment that you need to understand more about your workforce and the intersection and the diversity of it, right? And you're wondering how you can take steps to do that. And broadly in community, we see that. We see the consideration of different perspectives of faith. We see us trying to come to understand and learn about the experience of Indigenous Australian through our Truth Telling Commission. We are trying to deliberately address the intersections. You are creating safe and equitable organisations. This training here and now is a factor, is a deliberate step to do that. Your EAP is a deliberate step to create a safe organisation. There's always more we can do, but you're taking steps to do it. And always we're trying to set the right culture to create positive and equal and respectful relations between all genders or sexes. There's always more we can do. So, you know, that's sort of what you're already on the journey of. Actions for gendered drivers, challenge the condoning of violence. Don't watch the movies, don't accept it. Promoting independence again of decision-making in public life and private life. That is an ongoing journey that we try to do. Building new norms. So it is important when we recognise people like Grace Tame for her lived experience in the Australian of the Year. It is important that we have an older Australian of the Year. And a really important part of what we need to do to address those social fighters is we need to support men and boys to develop healthy masculinities and positive and supportive male peer relationships. Now, a classic story of this was when my daughter was in primary school. She had blokes that were friends. She got paid out for it, and so did they. It starts very early, It starts very early, but it's always an ongoing. I don't know if any of you have got sons growing up or have had sons or know young men growing up. There is so much pressure on them, as much as there are on young women, to conform to a stereotype. and they are policed for that. And we kind of went through the ways that that occurs. So that's the way we can do actions for gender equality. But, you know, the reinforcing factors challenge the normalisation. It's not acceptable. Reduce the long-term impacts of exposure to violence, strengthen those pro-social behaviours, and plan for and address backlash. These things are incredibly big, though. There's a lot of them there. They're at the global world peace, you know, getting more women in to the UN, getting more women involved in wartime conflict resolution is something that the UN's actively trying to do at the moment. Getting a diversity of voice and lived experience around decision-making tables. Institutionally, are the policies and procedures and the leadership walking the talk of doing what we need to do to create a better world? But at the individual level, what we know from the evidence is actually this is where it starts. The sense of accountability that we have to drive those changes that we want. So here's the good news. There is a set of superpowers that you can have and do have partially and will have by the end of this session. If you know the prevalence and the evidence of violence in our community, that is superpower number one. You will get people denying it. You will get people saying, yes, but what about men? You will get people saying, oh, it's not really true though. You will get people saying, oh, it's because he was a bit tired. I get a bit tired. That's the first thing. Know the evidence and have confidence in it, right? I think it's, I don't know if Lula's on there, if Lula can help me, but I think it's 1 out of every 4 call outs that Victorian police do is for family violence. Or it could be something like 2 out of 3. It's a lot.
Yeah, up to 60% of their work.
There you go. More than 1 in. Okay, know the prevalence. The second thing is be an active bystander, and we're going to go into that. And that certainly plays into some of these things about challenging and normalisation, about promoting, about strengthening pro-social behaviours, about supporting positive stereotypes, about strengthening positive and equal respect for relationships. Bystander action is incredibly important. And finally, be a person who can appropriately manage a disclosure and refer both to someone who's a victim and a perpetrator. They are actually your superpowers. Okay? So, true to form, I would really, really like it if you can take out that trusty phone again and go to this Slido, because we just like to do a bit of a calibration on where you're sitting at with some of these concepts. So the first one just is about a confidence around being an active bystander, just to see where you are at the moment. You know, do you think you could speak out and say something? There is no right and wrong answer to this. And we'll talk about a little bit about what an active bystander is in a second. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for that. The next one I want to do is, you know, how confident are you to manage a disclosure? If someone came to you and said, you know, I think I'm perpetrating, or I'm starting to feel myself getting really violent towards my partner, or if someone said I'm really worried about what's going on at home with my, or if, you know, someone did. Great. Perfect. Great. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Before we go on, do you know what an active bystander is? Anyone want to have a go at saying what an active bystander is?
So someone who speaks up if they're obviously part of a conversation or part of an action that isn't great. So as an example, if I am standing on the sidelines and someone is speaking in a less than favourable way to Maria, as an example, then I have every right to speak up and actively just support Maria as best as I can. Does that make sense?
Yep. Perfect sense. What do other people think of that?
Take positive steps.
Yep. Yep, taking positive steps.
Challenging things.
Challenging things, yeah. Yeah, stopping it before it starts is often another way of saying those sort of things as well. Yeah. Look, the term active bystander has been around for some time. It was probably popularised most in 1968 by two people called Darley and Latan, and we'll make sure we give you that reference. But it probably came most into conscience, and this is a picture of, if you know it, a brownstone in New York. But the reason I'm showing that was because the most famous case where it all came up was an investigation into the murder of a woman called Kitty Genevesy. And the sad story about then was that Kitty was murdered within people hearing that. And of course, the question is asked, well, why didn't anyone act? Right? What happened there? And since then, we've also used it to try to understand other issues like World War II in Germany. Why didn't the community react to the rise of Nazism? Right? Now, what Bob Latan, I think it was Bob Darley and Latan did, Bib Latan, sorry, John Darley, is that they looked at the psychologically and the pro-social or the social requirements or conditions that enable people to step up to be a bystander. Yeah? And they paced and they let it out and they tested it. So what we've got today is a very rigorous understanding about why and what enables bystander action to occur. And here's the good news as well, another bit of good news, what the options are that bystanders take. Often people think of bystander action as being something heroic. Yo, you've got to stand up and say something. But there are options. There are very different options. So, I don't know about you, but there's a few recent examples of bystander action that have caught the public's attention. Yeah, you might have one of them in mind. One that often comes to mind is the St. Kevin's tram incident. Does anyone recall that? There was a tram with a bunch of kids from St. Kevin's in it, and they were singing horrendous, rude songs on it. Do you remember that one? What ended up happening? I don't remember.
Someone reported it to the school,
yep.
I believe. Yep.
Yep.
I think the tram stopped.
Tram stopped?
And got filmed as well.
It got filmed. Yep. And then there might be other incidents that you've done at work. Someone makes a rude joke, someone speaks out and said, oh, no, I don't think so. Not today. Hi, Dale. Or if you're at a family dinner and someone says something a bit odd, people might ignore them. Someone makes a joke that's poor, no one laughs. There's a whole set of steps that lead to that point. And this, I'm about to show you a bit of a summary of it. So It's about, you're absolutely right, stepping up when you hear or see something, you become an active bystander. So to some extent, it's not actually about the action that you do. If you hear or see it, you're there, right? But the action that happens is to discourage the person that's being respectful and emotionally supportive, the person experiencing the harassment. So for instance, when I was about 13 or 14, I was hanging out with my mates in what used to be the thing before Fed Square. And I don't know about if you know that, but it was a pretty dark and dodgy place, wasn't it? At night, it was grey. There was lots of corners and grey. And my friend had a bloke come around the corner and pull her necklace to pull her in. And what stopped that was the fact that the four of us just wandered around the corner, and he let her go. So our presence was the moment of the active bystander. Yeah. We were supporting him there to actively stop that form of very extreme harassment. Similarly, other similar situations can occur. So what do they do? The first thing is that, sorry. The first thing that occurs is that the moment is recognised. And I know that sounds a bit obvious, but what Latan and Dali discovered is actually this don't go anywhere unless you know there's a problem. That's why the awareness raising is so important. And we see that occur at the moment with, you know, the COVID. The awareness raising about being safe, about wearing a mask and why it's important. And you notice that people start to notice, or people start to notice when people don't do it. So the notice raising, the awareness is really important to get that first thing happening, which is why talking about gender inequality and stereotypes and getting that part of your reticular activating system switched on is so important, because if you don't know it's there, not going to happen. One of the things that we know is that empathy plays a really big role in this. Organisational empathy, we call it, right? And that having the voices of lived experience and hearing narrative and story is an active way that we build the awareness about diversity and different needs. Because if your only role model is, and for many organisations it is, right? There are more white male called John running organisations in Australia than anyone else. If that is your lived experience, then your awareness of the need for change and improvement is reduced. To call out is reduced. That's why that's really important. So the first thing you've got to do is recognise that something is not right and something can be improved. And particularly, you know, young people, that's why education and investing in things like respectful relationships is important. The second thing that happens, so you've got to realise something. The second thing that happens is you've got to realise that you want to do something. Then that you can do something. Bystander action could occur very quickly, but this is what Latan and Dali discovered. First of all, you've got to click that something's wrong, and that click that something can be improved. And then you've got to recognise, actually, I want to do something, but then you've got to realise you can do something. And then, and only then, do you do the response, which is take action to make a difference. And at a high level, become part of that, joining with others to make a difference. Now that can occur like that, or it can take time. Now for me, I see bystander action in so many parts of the world. Let me give you a recent example. My beautiful, beautiful, beautiful boy who's 17, he has a wardrobe. We've had many conversations about the wardrobe. One day, I walked into his room and realised something was not right. The wardrobe was still there. I realised that something could be improved. I was very keen to do something and realised I could. It was called removal of Xbox privileges. I took action, did said removal, and made the change happen, and joined with the collective motherhood and parenthood to make a difference to floor droves around the world. That's bystander action. Let me give you another one at a meta level. Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame. You can draw a line between the two of them. Brittany Higgins spoke out because she heard Grace Tame speak out. Grace Tame spoke out because of Nina Fennell, right? Long time collective of saying something is not right. Something needs to be improved and can be improved. Want to do something. Enough is enough marches. March 31, 2021. The government realised that they had to do something and they can do something. It's still happening. Kate Jenkins was commissioned to do Respect at Work. Well, she was commissioned to do Respect at Work a long time ago, but then she did it into the parliamentary environment. And they're still determining what action they can do to make a difference. So bystander action can occur systemically and structurally, and it can occur individually. Yeah? Has anyone else got any thoughts that are maybe coming to them at the moment about bystander action that they've seen or witnessed to? It can be as broad as I have described. Anyone want to test something against that framework? Go for it.
We can't hear
Oh,
you.
Maria, Maria can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Yeah.
Maria's typing. We know also that bystander action can happen online as well. I wondered about the feeling of it being when it's your place to step in. Yes. Let's go there now. Being a complete stranger in the street. Bystanders have 4 options. You don't always have to be direct, right? And that's what I mean. Often there's this hero perspective of bystander action. You go up to the person, you can tell them what you think of them. Now, I clearly did that with my beautiful boy. Let's go back to the tram ride. Remember that? Now, I was delivering a training session at the City of Dandenong Council pre-pandemic. It was in person to the councillors. One of the councillors actually revealed that they were on that tram. And everyone just went, ooh, and they shared that story, right? And the story of that tram ride is actually, well, I found it more scary than what was reported in the media, right? The boys started singing and a woman stood up and said, can you stop? It's really offensive. So they did the direct. She was shouted down. A man stood up and said something. He was shouted down. So those individuals' safety, they felt scared. So what did they do? They recorded it and they sent it to the ABC. Now that is a delaying of the bystander action. That is a form of delaying or delegating, right? So sometimes it's not appropriate to stand up and speak. Sometimes it is. You know, you can say, oh, no jokes today. That's not funny. That's not funny, right? You can be direct that way. But your other options is you can delegate it. Now, if you do not feel in a safe space, the ultimate delegate is the police. You can call the coppers. In your workplace, you can go to your manager. Your other option is to delay, and often this takes the form of you going in to check with the person afterwards. So at a workplace or a family situation, it might be you go and check and the person say, oh, I thought that was really inappropriate. I'm really sorry that happened to you. That is a form of bystander action. It is a pro-social behaviour to demonstrate camaraderie and support. Yep. The other form, of course, is distraction. The best example I can tell you of this is when I was in Sydney. I lived in Sydney for about 20 years. And for my sins, I did about 10 years of Kung Fu. There we go. That tells you something about myself. We used to hang out at a pub, and the Sifu, the teacher of that, never got into a fight because he would hurt someone. But there was a brawl starting up. Blokes starting to eye each other off. It was two blokes starting to get in stuff wet. And the response, that the Sifu did was to turn to the aggressor and say, don't I know your mother? And what it did is it literally distracted the moment. It just literally took the head out. Now, that particular individual is very brave, he's very trained, he's very confident. He's probably done this a few times, but it was a very interesting discussion about distraction. All right? So you can distract. So Maria, when it comes to being a complete stranger in the street, there are lots of options open to you. Now for mine, I often use the delay. So I have been in a situation with my ex-boss. We're in London. I was there for a Girl Guide gig. We saw a woman being dragged into a car. She resisted and pulled away. And my chair at that time was a woman called Robinette, who was very brave. She's got a lot of chutzpah, but she was with me. It was a very public event. She just went straight up to the woman, ignoring the bloke, said, hello, can you help me find such and such? So you can often approach that as well. It depends upon your level of safety as well. You can check with someone afterwards if they're okay. I've done that a few times as well. Anyone else got any examples they want to talk through?
I've just got I guess, more of a question. If you're met with resistance, so I guess if you're recognising patterns that are, you know, unhealthy, but the person in there is not quite understanding that, and they're sort of saying, "Oh, it's fine," and making excuses for it. Just how do you, you know, how much do you push or? Yeah.
Look. Lula can talk absolutely about resistance and its forms and its metaphors, but you know, that form of long-term change, you being an active bystander constantly, can be exhausting, and you do make active choices, but you can choose to persist, keep speaking up. I talk about, you know, uncles and aunties in my family that persistently seem to believe points of view about Indigenous Australians that I personally find incredibly offensive. Now, I keep persisting, saying, nah, that's wrong. Nah, that's wrong. Now what's happened is they just don't say it around me, which I don't know if that's a blessing or not. But you're right, it can be exhausting, and it's different forms of resistance, isn't it, Lula? It can be denial, disavow, different forms of resistance. Lula, do you want to talk through that? Maybe you've probably got some insights on that.
I think at that point, if someone's really pushing back, I mean, every situation is contextual, so you sort of know what your position is, what your influence might be, or what your position of power and leverage you might have to use in that situation. And no one should be putting themselves in harm's or danger's way to do this work necessarily. But I think it comes back to that piece of that awareness, that I like acknowledging, recognizing it, that point of recognition. So the more that you do that, it may not seem like it in the heat of the moment because that person's ego is at risk and they're not going to back down, but it sinks in. It has an effect, even if it doesn't change them right then. It might even make them, in some sad cases, it might make them dig in and feel more defensive and go more into that position of ego and dig more into what they know, because that's their only way of feeling safe through it. But it does create that moment of recognition, and you've acknowledged, well, this is not okay, at least for me and what I think is going on. And that has a ripple effect. And if you do it, someone else does it, that message starts to be received, then they might change where they have those conversations. They might keep it more private, or they might actually take time to think, which would be incredible and useful, And so it is a process of change, and no process of change is instantaneous. But I think it always comes back to that first step in the change process, but in being a bystander, is that point of recognition and acknowledgement that that's not okay. And that in and of itself can be enough to create the change.
And sometimes what it is all you're doing is just setting up this first stage. They might not even realise or have the awareness to know that something's not right. And that might not be anything that individuals on their own can address, but actually systemic and social stereotyping. So if I could just use this as an opportunity to talk about some of the evidence around young people and young men's belief about stereotypes, which is becoming more prevalent and more persistent and more alarming in recent years. The awareness that we, or the work that we need to do to get that awareness in young men about, addressing the stereotypes and the belief. One of which, I have to say this, is porn, the prevalence of porn, the reinforcing of it. So those systemic structures that exist, the prevalence of this medium, which there's some great work going around about that. And if you want to know more, I highly recommend Marie Crabb's work. Our Watch has just released some resources on this through the line that's freely available to look at. But sometimes those systemic structures and social realities are often what prevent, something's not right.
It's also just pornography has been recognised in the draft National Action Plan to end violence against women and children as an area of growing concern and need for addressing.
So that probably didn't answer your question as simply, because as Lula said, the context is all. But the principles of the bystander action are to intervene as early as you can if it's safe to do so in the moment action. The key is to address the attitudes and the behaviours, not the individual. So with my boy, it wasn't him, it was the bloody wardrobe, right? With the people on the tram, it was the song, it was the recording of the song. Because you remember, didn't actually show their faces, it was the back of those boys mainly that came out. The comment that when someone's, I find it really surprising that you'd say that. What makes you say that? But the ultimate thing, and hopefully the thing that you can take from this, is to give it a go, remembering that you've got the 4 Ds of the options. You can only change attitudes and behaviours if we try. What we know from the evidence, though, is that what stops people at taking action is what I said before, not knowing it was something to address. That we don't know that the situation requires something. So, we can often exist in environments. Steph, are you okay? Do you need to get a drink of water? You're okay, darling? Often we can exist in environments. Remember I talked about before these drivers of family violence, and how we've got to sometimes take action to challenge normalizations. We can exist in environments where behaviours or poor attitudes are normalised. And that can be bad for everyone, women, men, all genders. Remember we talked about the last time, you know, the man box and the evidence strongly showing that when men exist in environments or have behaviours, the stereotypes of hypermasculinity reinforced, high levels of self-harm, high levels of violence against themselves and others, higher risk-taking. Normalising or challenging the normalised of poor behaviours is just good for everyone. The other thing too, we know what stops people at taking action was when they say, well, that's not my job, right? So pro-social behaviour, when you take a responsibility to make a difference. Now, some people call that advocacy, some people call that a whole range of different ways. But at the end of the day, it is our job to make a difference. I think, I've just forgotten the senator from Tasmania, when she stood up in federal parliament and said it's called Jackie Lambie, a goddamn bloody adult. Oh, yes, please. I've forgotten. It's being offered coffee. So it actually is our job. And, you know, we raise children to take accountability. You know, it's a never-ending piece of work. But hopefully what you see is that bystander action actually gives us the permission and empowers us to take action in a whole range of ways. Distract, delegate, direct, or delay. Remember, you've got options. And finally, what stops people from taking action is not knowing what to do. And Maria, you really stimulate before to go into those 4 Ds, but remember you've got options. Often, you know, going up to the person afterwards and showing solidarity is a very powerful form as well.
I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yay!
Yeah. I will get used to these headphones one day.
Yeah,
like my example was it happened a few months ago, but me and my husband were in a shopping centre and I just noticed this man and woman off to the side, and the man's behaviour was just very pointing, very aggressive. And like we both just felt like, you know, I felt like there was something I wanted to do, but I just didn't know. Would this guy turn around and just tell me to F off? And, you know, I just didn't feel like I had to.
So you got to hear you wanted to do something.
Yeah.
And that occurred very quickly.
It was just like, saw it out the corner of my eye. And
that's brilliant.
Like, felt that, yes, something needed to be done, but I just didn't feel like there was anything I could do.
That's brilliant. And thank you for sharing that. And just good on you for doing that. Amazing. Right? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
Well,
yes, Steph. Sorry, Kevin. Steph?
Was someone else going to go? Or?
Yeah, Steph was. You go, Steph.
Go, Steph.
So my apartment's right next to a launching house facilities. So sometimes you do see distressed woman, and must have been like a month or two ago. I went to our local AJ, and there was a girl that she was really distressed. She had a bit of blood on her, and she was like, "Can I please use your phone?" She's like, you know, like my boyfriend's getting a bit violent with me. So instantly, I was just like, "Yeah, of course I can help." But at the same time, I was fearing for my safety as well. So obviously I gave her the phone. I was like, please call the police. And I felt really bad because I didn't want to stay, because I was like, just in case my boyfriend came and then it would be the two of us being not safe. So I went to the couple of the guys who were working there. I was like, can you please look after her until the police came?
Yeah.
But after I left, I felt just really guilty that I didn't stay there for her as well.
Oh, Steph.
So yes, I don't know what actually happened to her. So I think the question was going to be like, what do you usually do if you don't feel like you're in a safe space? Like, you want to help. Like, I was just like, here's my phone.
You did it. But you did really, Steph, you did it.
Mm.
And I think sometimes what is guilt is actually empathy and care. And that is never something to feel guilty about. Concern is, and care is the manner of what is good. It is actually joining with others to make a difference. Congratulations, Steph. That is also really excellent work.
I think it's also important to remember, you know, your safety is really important. You getting harmed as well is not going to fix the situation. And also, what is your role of responsibility as someone who's a stranger to those parties in that situation? You actually did everything that you could in your power, really. That and that's your part of that picture. You know where your responsibility ends, because otherwise we can feel overwhelmed and like there's so much more we could do. But as Kit said, you did all the bits. You recognised, realised, responded, and that's just something, you know, it's very hard, especially when you start to think about, well, what happened next, what could have happened, but all of that piece of accountability rests on the perpetrator. They're the ones who need to be held responsible, and they're the ones who need to change. So you did what you could in the moment with what you had, your resources, as well as, importantly, keeping yourself safe.
Yeah. I think my takeaway was like, after that, I think I was like, do I educate myself that if I'm ever in a similar situation, I know what I could have done better, you know, keeping both of us safe or just finding alternatives. So yeah, that's why I thought today's session will be really good, because I'll be able to be in a better place next time if I were to encounter something similar.
Yeah.
And the other things that will provide you access to resources too that we've done throughout is, you now know, 1-800-RESPECT. You now know local services that you can refer them to, so we can make sure that you have those details so that next time you're like, okay, well, you've called the police, but also you might want to call these people, or you don't want to call the police, well, this is an alternative, and they can provide you some advice, or maybe we find out who are the local services to AGPC, but also regionally we can provide you the fact sheet of who's available across Victoria, and then you've got it there. At least it's, you've read it once maybe, and at least jog that for you if you come into those circumstances again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to Maria though. Kevin, did you have something you wanted to contribute though to what Maria was saying, or generally?
Yeah, probably. I was just going to say that generally if something like that's going down is to just ask the guy if he's okay, or if he's got a minute, or if he's got to sort of put the pin back in the grenade, but hopefully to get him to think about that a bit later, because he's had someone that he doesn't know asking him if he's okay, and his subconsciousness, that might ring a little bell.
Yep. Maria, I think for mine, Lila talked about your safety. So I think you did at the time, we do. There's lots of different options being presented here. Sometimes just walking close, standing quite close, can do the orcs feel. Yeah. The other thing you do is tell store security.
Yeah.
One of my great jobs I did for many years was I worked at David Jones, menswear, women's ladies' shoes, men's underwear and socks. I'm not telling you any stories about that. Anyway, the security staff were amazing. And very early on, I learned that this infrastructure exists. You don't see them around. But if you are in a store or if you are in an environment, that's what they're for. They're for Target, Kmart's, the big Westfields. You know those cleaners that go around Westfields?
Yeah.
Those trucks are really loud. And they like a good talk, those people. They're good, There's something going, can you just walk with me? Oh, sure, love. Or they'll just pick up the phone and they'll do that, right? So that's the other thing too, is because remember you can delegate.
Mm-hmm.
But absolutely, if you don't feel safe, Well, exactly what Lula said. And this stuff takes time and practice, and you're probably hearing this for the first time. Kevy's right. You know, that my Sifu, there's no way I was going to do what he was doing. My response was to walk out of the pub. I'm not going to do that.
And I think, you know, what Kit's highlighting about security, so there's always centre management in any one of those places, but security and coming back to what I said about everything is contextual in the situation, and you'll know what your position of power is and what levers you have to pull. And often for women in positions where we're dealing with men's violence, we don't have physical power to leverage to make a change by stepping into the fray, and that is possibly what would create more harm to us. So that's very tricky, and not all men have that either, by the way. Confident man.
Really important to state.
Yeah. So size matters when it comes to these things. Strength and ability, and confidence, and their own lived experience of violence as well. So in an individual one-on-one, when you're dealing with violence, often it isn't the stepping in that's going to feel comfortable, but it is the distracting or going and telling someone else. And, you know, when you're talking about security, well, they hold a really different position of power with the right to enforce physical force if they need to on someone who's acting in an antisocial or violent way in that setting. They have been given that enforcement power, and so they have really different levers to pull. And it is about that contextual element and positions of power and what you can do in that situation.
Violet.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you guys?
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too. I have an example. I worked at my last job, Melbourne Racing Club, and we had we had the Caulfield Cup race on that day, and I found we had security to deal with. And some of the security staff were completely inappropriate around women who had too much to drink. So there was a dance show going on on a stage, and this one girl was almost passed out. And so as this, I was my role that day was a safety officer,
right? And
I could see a bunch of security looking up her dress while she was, vulnerable. So I stepped in and I took her to the first aid room, and then I reported to their safety, or they didn't know, they knew I worked there, but they didn't know that I saw them. And then I reported it to the head of their security. And I said, these guys acted completely inappropriate. I got their IDs and reported it because I just felt that was just so wrong when you were meant to be protecting people. And then just I guess I'm stereotyping here, but it just seems to be the type of people employed as security at the moment seems to be the ones who are known to discriminate against women at the moment.
Absolutely. And look, can I just provide, that's an excellent story. So for me, which one of those four did you employ?
I directed.
Yeah, well, I think what you did really well is you delegated. You gave the numbers, right?
Yeah.
But then you went up to the victim and you didn't direct because probably you felt a sense of not feeling safe. Yeah. And the insights that you shared about that sector. Now, I remember one of the things that the Gender Equality Act is looking at is workforce segregation. Remember that?
Yeah.
What it's trying to do, build safe, strength, positive, equal relationships, but really challenge these normalizations of violence and aggression and stereotypes. One of the things the reasons we want to stop segregation of workforces is because they reinforce stereotypes of ways of work. But your identification of that issue is your tracking of that is right. You know, some of this stuff doesn't happen overnight, but it will happen, as the ad says. But that little bit of contribution that you did by the reporting and taking care of that individual, perfect.
Mm. And sadly, but this is something we're dealing with in the gender equality space and preventing violence against women, is that those really blokey environments where men are empowered to use force, unfortunately, do tend to be male peer relations that encourage or promote aggression and violence and disrespect of women. So there's a real correlation between those kind of work environments, including policing, including fire, including ambulance. Like, we're seeing it come through in all of those really traditionally male power jobs, particularly with enforcement powers, that have strong cultures that buy into, or have needed to at particular points in time, display that very dominant male stereotype. And so there's a lot of work to do in relation to how do you continue to benefit from and use men's physical strength and their ability to be imposing and their ability to enforce, without that turning into an abuse of power, without that turning into degradation of others, and without that being an environment that does promote and perpetuate violence against women.
Yeah. So when the evidence says, and what our work tries to do, is that, you know, when we try to change poor behaviour, there are kind of three kind of thematic things that people do, and you've all talked about examples. You know, the call it out, and that can be a very public way. You know, the General of the Australian Army, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, is a very public calling it out. But we can also do it one-to-one as well. You can show you don't approve. There's lots of ways that that can occur. Sometimes the most effective is not laughing at the joke, turning and walking away, and creating coalitions of support. You know, sometimes one of the things that can happen in resistance and backlash is creating the perception of isolation, that actually they're trying to create the pro-social behaviours. Oh, that's just political correctness gone mad. No, we're actually trying to create a harmonious environment. And all research actually shows that the bulk of Australians, the bulk of our community wants that. So when you're thinking about bystander actions, you know, this is just a sort of a set of examples you can call upon. Ask questions. I'm not sure that's true. What evidence have you got that that's true? How do you know that to be true? Start a conversation. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can have is to get people to talk about their prejudices and their bias, because it is that education opportunity. It can be really hard work, but sometimes it's the start of actually learning. So one of the things that WHISE is doing at the moment is engaging with what we call vaccine resistance. And one of the risks to actually public health at the moment is actually stopping people talking about their resistance. Yeah, because we actually want to be able to answer the concerns that they have. Now, crudely, one of the things that you do in your work is answer questions about Formula One, so people can get to know you and engage with what you're doing in that running of that event. Oh, it's just for people who've got very big pockets and have lots of money and drive around in Porsches. Well, no, it's not. It's all sexist and it's just about, well, no, it's not. So you're engaging in that conversation, asking the questions. Tell a person how you feel. So you're using I statements. Remember, we talked about don't attack the person. I find that really difficult to hear. I'm really sorry you feel that way. From my perspective, you can enlist other people from support if you feel confident of that, using we statements. You can refer to community expectations. So you can often do that when you get these generalizations. What's a good generalization, Lula, of resistance and backlash? Oh, all women are.
It's not that bad. She's exaggerating. They're exaggerating.
They're exaggerating.
They're making it up. Denial. So they're making it up is denial. It's not really that bad. Denial, minimizing. They're emotional.
Sure that's not the truth. Yeah, it's that bad.
That's right. They're emotional. Absolutely.
They're emotional. They're all just emotional. They're all on their periods.
So all of those are denial. And, you know, I put earlier in the piece the spectrum. I don't know if it'll open. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, there's a spectrum of resistance and the forms of resistance. I put it in there for you. But it's essentially that one end there's denial and disavowal, and that's where all that all sits in. So denial is that piece of they're emotional, they're on the period, making excuses. It's not my problem. Someone else will deal with it. You know, it's disavowal. Not someone else will deal with it as in you delegate to someone else to deal with it, but just as in it's not my problem. Don't care. Not my issue. So have a look at that piece, and it's just a really empowering thing to understand the forms of resistance and what they look like. Inaction's another one, which we see a lot in organisations. That's about, oh, we've got lots of priorities. We don't know if we're going to have the funding. There's just heaps happening, more time. All the reasons that institutions don't make change is inaction, and that's another form of resistance. So it's really helpful to be able to name it, because then we can work on the strategies that you use to progress it, work around it. Even just simply saying, well, you're just denying the problem, and that doesn't help.
Another thing that we do is just take non-verbal action, just show you don't approve. There's nothing like a flat face. Yeah? Change the subject. My mother in my family, I don't know about your mothers or your fathers or your beloved elders, I often talk about her powerful and deadly use of the sigh. So a kid will say something stupid and she'll just go, it's like, I reckon it could cure, you know, world wars. You know, just stick her at the negotiation table between Russia and the Ukraine and just get her to do, very powerful. The other thing you do is just refer to the law. You know, well, actually, that's the law. So one of the ones that we've been having recently is around the conversation around sexual harassment. Oh, but it's, you know, it's not really, it's joke. Well, the definition of sexual harassment is actually not what you intend, it's how it's perceived. Oh, that's not true. Let me quote you. Who said that? Oh, the Australian Sex Discrimination Commissioner. Sometimes it can feel like it goes on forever. But just quote, it's the policy. That's a form of delegation too, right? So you have actually got lots of options. You know, and this is some example of questions. You'll find your own. Sorry, what did you mean by that? Sometimes asking them to say it again actually gives them a moment to go down from that stupid part of their brain into the real part of their brain to think about what they're saying. What made you think that was a joke? Said with a sense of genuine curiosity actually opens up a conversation. Why would you say that? Sorry, you're saying that people should have to put up with sexism? Oh, no, I'm not saying that. Oh, good, because that's what I thought you were saying. So there's lots of different options. But as we started to say, you've got options. You don't actually have to do, you know, whether it's resistance or backlash, you've got options. You can be direct. You can ask the questions. You can delegate. There's different forms of delegation. You can distract them, or you can delay and go and speak to the person afterwards. So you can find your own way of doing it that does not compromise that sense of safety. And I just want to recognise that Lila's put in the chat a really important thing that I just want to read out, just to say thanks to everyone who's shared their examples of what you've noticed and when you've acted. It is really courageous, and it's hard to do because it can be scary, especially when there's a safety issue. But that's absolutely right. You are challenging social norms of power to take action. You are encouraging pro-social forms of behaviour, and you are exercising a superpower. I know there's lots of Marvel comics around, there's DC. This is actually the superpower. Yeah, this stuff. Now, what we wanted to do next is to come back and work through some case studies. It's 11:20. Let's have a 5-minute comfort break. Come back, and we're going to take you through some examples. One's in a public transport situation, the other one's at a dinner party, something online, and then something in the media. Okay, so I thought there's only 11 of us, so if you're comfortable, I was going to break you into groups, but I think let's have a conversation as a collective. Is that all right with you? And we'll just see what happens. So go grab yourself, turn your video off if you want, or your microphone, and give yourself 5 minutes and come back, and we'll go through some examples. So how are we feeling? Yeah? Okay. So what we thought we'd do now is maybe share some examples. When you read these examples and consider them, really what we're asking you to do is to think about that 3-stage process and how you might respond to it, right? The question at the end of them is, you know, what would you do? Yeah, so let's do this first one. So I want you to imagine you're riding on the Frankston train into Sydney. The city, not Sydney, the city. It's crowded. Most people are wearing masks. However, you noticed a maskless man muttering slurs and threats under his breath towards a younger woman of colour near him. You are nearby. Notice there is more room at the other end of the train car. Yeah, so in a train to the city, most people wearing masks. A maskless man is muttering under his breath towards a younger woman of colour, their threats, their slurs. What would you do? So let's go back to this and step through. Does someone want to talk through this in terms of that scenario? Someone want to have a go? Yes, Stephanie Van, thank you. You're on mute, my friend. Yeah.
So I have to click it 4 times.
Ah, bizarre.
Strange.
So do you want to...
This one has resonated a lot. I have taken the train into work quite a bit before I got my car recently off mum, and so I have so many train stories. I'd say with this one, it would probably one that well, if I was in this situation, I would probably want to observe a bit at first. Being a packed train, it can be one of those weird things in the morning. Sometimes everybody's got earphones in.
They do, don't they?
Deadly quiet.
Yeah.
I guess watching too, but it is a lot of people watching that can happen on the train. So I suppose just to notice if things are beginning to escalate, to then be able to jump in, or if the female has even realised or is aware, or if she's looking uncomfortable, try and make eye contact with her, and try and say, like, not bring attention to it, but just say, try and move yourself from where you are. Or even, I don't know, it can be, I've done a lot of moving carriages on trains to try and get away from particular situations.
Yes.
But without escalating things sometimes, because it can feel like you're just on this big tube that's kind of moving and there's no
You're
escape.
trapped. You can feel like you're trapped. Yeah. So you
Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, Kit.
No. It's absolutely, yeah, right. So you noticed something was not right, and you were tracking as well about something could be improved. Yeah. Okay, great. What other? Did anyone else have any other thoughts around that?
I would personally go straight to the woman and just sit there, try and stand next to her and have a chat.
Yep, that's another one. Yep.
Yeah. My thought is sometimes these things happen with drug affected or drunken men.
Yep.
And that it's used as an excuse, where they say, oh, he's a drunk homeless man, just ignore him or whatever. But then how would you handle that situation when there is drugs or alcohol involved?
Yep. It can be very hard. I don't know about you, but when I get those situations, I find myself getting hot, panicky. Yeah. Kevin, you raised your hand there.
I suppose it's different if you're male or female trying to help her, because one, you have to introduce yourself and make her comfortable that your intention is to help, right?
Yep.
And then ask her if she's comfortable moving further up the carriage. And if they're infected by drugs and that, you've got to guard yourself on the way out.
Yep.
So,
there's never anything wrong with protecting your own safety. That's absolutely the right thing to do. All of these are great options. Going up and sitting next to her, standing in front of her, pretending you know her, but similarly calibrating it in terms of if it escalates as well. Yeah.
I was just thinking, Kit, I love the idea of being direct, but I think to Steph's point before as well, because I think you are surrounded by people, so you might feel a little bit safer. But yeah, to Steph's point, a lot of them have their earphones in and may not be aware of the situation. So I think just trying to help the woman, because at the end of the day, you're on a train and you can't exactly get off whenever you want and leave the situation. You can change carriages, but he could always follow if he really wanted to.
Yep.
So I think the main thing here would be, to help her rather than maybe address him.
Absolutely. Yeah, lots of options. But you are right, Kevy. The response will be different depending on your perspective and your lived experience and your level of confidence and skill. Remember, part of this is thinking that you can do something. Yeah. What would be a way to delegate this?
Well, from my experience, sometimes you talk to someone next to you as well.
Yeah. You can kind of sometimes, I don't know, my experience of trains, I've done a bit of PT in my life, last 20 years mainly in Sydney. And even though they've got those headphones on, I'm often surprised how aware people are of their environment anyway.
And you need to keep it calm. It's like one of the main things is to slightly, is shame it to change the game. We used to say shame to change the game.
Yep.
And that's sort of the approach.
Yep. The other thing you can do, of course, is call the guard. I don't know if you've seen, but the security numbers are in there as well. You can alert. You could sometimes I've seen there's text numbers you can text something to give yourself some sort of confidence as well. One of the things that our watch talks about doing, just remind me, is doing something. So whether the observation, bringing someone else in to maybe help you, going up, as you say, Lani, not talking directly to the perpetrator, but engaging with the woman, saying, giving her the option to break out of that situation. Great. All right, let's go to another one. Might be familiar. You're at a dinner party with friends. At the end of the night, a couple of people offer to help with the dishes. Yay! Your host proudly tells everyone that his partner prepared all the food and is happy to clean up. He says, "You don't need help with this, do you?" She looks tired and shakes her head. What would you do?
Get up and help her.
Yay! So just deliberately ignore the call and get up and help her.
Yeah, and thank her for dinner.
Yeah. Anything else?
I might even jump in with the whole rule around whoever cooks doesn't clean.
Yes.
So let's share the help.
Yeah. So, you know, that is direct. That is a form of direct. You know, you're also making a bit of a joke about it, but you're absolutely showing solidarity there and you're calling out that behaviour. Yeah. Has anyone ever seen or been in a situation like that before?
Yeah, we had a really weird one at Christmas actually.
Yeah.
Just this Christmas just gone. So it was at my brother-in-law's place, and he and his wife are, you know, 70, 75, a bit older than me. And he, I think, done most of the prep to cook the lunch, and he was a bit stressed about it. We realised later that they hadn't done any entertaining for a while, and, you know, COVID and all of that.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Anyway, he was, I don't know, getting something off the barbecue and needed to take it inside, and he was saying to his wife, "Can you open the door?" And his wife and the other guest had the same first name, and so the other guest thought that he was talking to her, and he was like, "No, you know, I mean,
such and such,"
you know.
Yeah.
And it was really weird. It was like he was really determined that only his wife should get up and open the door so he could take the food into the kitchen, whereas the other person was sitting closer to it and was totally happy to do it. It was a really odd moment. It felt like bullying. It was really strange.
But you noticed it.
Yeah, we all noticed it. It was weird. It was really weird. It was like, you know, when someone else is saying, "Oh, I'll get it," and he's saying no, like you kind of...
It's her job.
Yeah, it was really uncomfortable, really uncomfortable.
It's amazing, isn't it? But it's interesting, that sense of that shared understanding that can very quickly pass.
Yeah.
Did wife, I'll use Jan, get up and do it, or did other Jan do it?
No, the other Jan.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So she kind of intervened.
Yeah. So she actually was a bystander to that vibe.
Yeah. And then, like, later in the night when the other guests had gone, my husband said to his brother, "Are you all right? Like, you don't seem quite right today."
Ah.
And he said, "Yeah, I felt really stressed about the whole entertaining thing."
So there was a direct and then also a delay follow-up. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Nice one. Perfect. And a seeking to understand the behaviour. I think that was really good too.
Yeah.
Another one that's coming up more and more is this, yeah. So this is just an example. Oh, just a heads up on the transport one, Violet is, yep. And another one, Lauren has said, the train has a help button you can use. Are they in the vestibule area or are they in the carriage areas? They're sort of down the...
They're in the carriage.
They're in the carriage, yeah.
Yep.
And look, that's kind of, you know, that's a form of delay as well. Delegate as well. So let's think about this one. You're scrolling through your Instagram feed, Twitter feed, the feed, and you've seen someone comment a post saying, "That's so gay." More comments, boss. Now, for the moment, I want you to imagine that that's in a public forum first. Yep, what would you do? And then we might go to one that maybe is a more personal forum with friends. So in a public forum, what would you think about doing? You've got lots of options here. No right or wrong.
I think celebrities have started stepping up, name shaming people who do send terrible messages to them. And I think you know, name shaming, but then you've got the problem of fake accounts. But name shaming a person, and you know, I think you also see a lot more people now standing up to these sort of comments, deleting them off. If it's a public forum, they delete the person because it's inappropriate. They also warn people, do not post inappropriate comments, or you will be deleted off the account or whatever.
I think it's good to let them know privately as well, because they might just not realise. That's actually something I used to say, that's so gay. And I have lots of gay friends. I think it was just an unconscious thing. Don't say it now. But I think, you know, the first call might be just pointing it out to the person rather than shaming them, because they might just not be thinking about it deeply.
So calling it out that way, brilliant. What about if it was a private group? If it was a group of, say, I don't know, in my family, Facebook's used more, I get more with the family because of the way it's used intergenerationally. What if it was a more personal thing?
You could just say, that comment makes me feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Or excuse me?
I often say to people, I don't think you can say that anymore.
Yeah.
You know, when someone comes out with something racist or whatever, it's like, it's not really okay anymore.
No.
I also like, what are your concerns? Like when they're like, oh, that's not a, you know, you can kind of address it if they seem to be saying, oh, what about men and what about this? When the whataboutism comes in, like, well, what are your concerns there?
Really good news, guys, and I've just put a link in there, is that there is an emerging practice of how to call out inappropriate behaviour online, and it uses some of the principles of delaying. Ginger Gorman, who wrote a book about online trolling, this is an ABC article, but she says what you can do is just reach out to the victim. If you don't feel able to publicly intervene, you can send the private message, you know. You can, you know, publicly you'll see reclaiming of a hashtag occurring. There is an online harassment fuel medal as well that you can use as well. So there's lots of different things. But I think one of the things that I've noticed publicly and privately is that often people reinforce the person who the abuse or the inappropriate comments are being made of. So a classic example of that at the moment is Grace Tame. If she posts something, she often gets trolling go back to her. You'll see what happens is people say, Grace Tame, at Grace Tame, just want to thank you for all the incredible work you're doing and your leadership. So it doesn't even engage in it, but just reinforces the positive messaging as well. And, you know, Lex is right, you know, the other option available to you is just to say, oh, please, really? Or as Lula says, what are your concerns? Of course, the other one is just to, you know, as I said, the ignoring it, you just go back to the person that the comment's perpetrated to support them. So that is another option as well. All right, let's go into a fourth one. She says, madly trying to find, oh, there's the Zoom share. It just disappears on me. All right. Media. While grabbing a cup of tea in the morning, you find yourself chatting with colleagues about a recent news item about a high-profile rape case concerning a young woman who was out with friends in the CBD. Two colleagues start to blame the victim for what's happened. One says, well, she should not have been out late at night. She was probably drunk as well. And another adds, yeah, women need to behave more safely. The first then says, I really worry that women don't know how dangerous men are these days. No one else speaks up. What do you do? So you're in an organisational setting. You are getting the cup of tea with colleagues. The implication is this is that you either hear it or you might be part of the conversation. No one else says anything. Any comments on this one?
I can jump in for sure.
Okay.
So that's wrong.
That's wrong. Just that's wrong.
Completely wrong.
Yeah, it's something, there was news from Ireland about a young lady, Aisling Murphy, who went for a run.
Yeah.
And that's the most recent one I've heard of in this situation. Unfortunately, like she died. But, you know, I would speak up quite strongly in that this needs to be flipped on men completely in society. Like, it's always, what can women do? What can we do to make ourselves more safe? You know, and it's something I've chatted with my husband and other male friends about. And, you know, have they ever had to carry their keys between their fingers when they've walked to their car in the dark? And are they constantly looking over their shoulder when they're out for a walk and things like that? And it's always placed blame on the woman, and it's never flipped around to be like, well, why isn't society calling out men on this?
And in particular, so I think Lula's beaming from ear to ear at the moment, because this is one of Lula's pieces of change in the world is doing this. But I think the other thing that case says is that it could be a man or a woman making these comments. Yeah. Dale.
Thank you. Look, it's shocking behaviour, that conversation, and you would hope straight away someone would tell them so. But I think what would be the next most important thing would be to, you know, those two people would need training or help of some sort, because there's something ingrained in having those kind of attitudes that you just don't solve with saying stop it.
Yeah.
And that it's interesting, as you raised the tram example, the St. Kevin's boys. There was a lot of I guess public interest in how the school was actually helping the boys, because yes, they did the wrong thing, but also they're so young that they actually need to be educated. Yes. And so there was questions around, well, we don't want them to get, you know, we don't want them to be like in 10 years' time. So you've got to try and do something about that now. So I think education and help is definitely on the cards for people who speak like that.
Yeah, and maybe the question that Lula offered, which is, tell me why, that sort of acting with curiosity, tell me why you think that, you know, might be interesting as well. Lex.
Yeah.
Good point, Dale. Thank you.
With the scenario that you put up, Kit, the first thing that comes to mind for me is to repeat the words back to them about
nice.
Don't they know how dangerous men are these days? So why is that women's problem? That's actually a problem for men.
Beautiful.
It's
so
not
again,
something women should be having to change their behaviour for. Men should be getting their shit together and not being like that.
That's my first thought in that conversation too. Is like, okay, well, if men are dangerous, as you say, one, should we lock up all men then? Should we not trust any men? And two, if men are dangerous, who's responsible for that?
Yeah. And a really effective question is actually reframing the assumptions. Neurologically, what actually happens if you ask a really good question, and really good questions are not difficult to put together, is actually what happens is you actually get people neurologically to shift from the limbic system up to the cortex, which you want them to do, because people don't think when they're back here. They think when they're back here. So I actually want to shift them up. So a curious, genuine question will actually get a reframe moment occurring, and that is a very powerful act of a bystander. Very powerful act. Lani.
Could it also be calling out, I guess they've called out, you know, women's behaviour, and it's like, well, this isn't just happening to women who may be a little bit drunk or walking late at night. This is happening to women in every situation and very different situations. So again, as everyone has said, putting the onus back on the men. But calling out it's not particular situations it's happening in. Even if that was the case, it doesn't mean it's the woman's fault, but it's happening in very different situations.
Yep, absolutely. I think hopefully what you've seen, and I want to move on to the next section because I want to start to talk about disclosures too, because hopefully what you've seen is the range of options available to you. The other thing hopefully what you're seeing is you can debrief this and talk about this with colleagues. You've actually got now a group of people that you can debrief in. I heard this the other day. How would you have dealt with that? The peer role in this work is really important. Lex.
The other thing that just came to mind for me is that, correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of violence against women happens in their own home and is perpetrated by someone they know.
Very good.
So those would be two things you could say to that group of people who are making those comments.
Yep. And just to go back to what I was saying, perfect use of your superpower. Combining the streams. Beautifully done. Because knowledge and understanding is powerful. Another way that we can actually use our knowledge of a bystander action, remembering bystanders, you know, we recognize, we realize we can do something and we respond, is actually when we get a disclosure, right? Now, when we were designing this, we understood that people keen to say, well, how can I be? And this is just managing a disclosure really well is a form of being an active bystander. When someone reveals to me that they have been directly experienced of being a victim of violence or perpetrated it. Now, what we know from great organisations like Our Watch is that there is a very clear set of steps we can take. And these set of steps that we can take recognise that we're not social workers, we're not counsellors, we don't have perhaps family case management experience to do this. We're ordinary, I guess, for want of a better term, everyday people who can find a superpower to help the world be a better place by appropriately managing a disclosure within our circle of control, right? And it's a form of being a bystander. The good news is whether it's a victim, survivor or perpetrator, the first few steps of it are similar, right? And it starts from just being authentic to yourself and following those steps. Respond, recognise, realise, respond and recognise. Now, this is taken from the Our Watch Workplace Equality and Respect resource for workplaces, which we will make sure we get through to Maristella and Lex, and it is literally these points, right? If you have a victim survivor coming up to you and disclosing, the first thing you do, and I know this might sound obvious, but it's amazing how often it doesn't happen, believe them. Believe them. There are countless of pieces of scenarios and evidence where if that doesn't happen, you are not being an active bystander. It's the first point of recognition in the journey. Show empathy, but the way you show empathy is by avoiding judgment and blame, where you condemn the use of the violence, not the perpetrator. So the evidence shows what you're aiming to do if someone discloses a victim survivor is you're aiming to keep an open channel of communication. Because someone might disclose to you and they might not want to do anything about it, right? What you're doing is someone's disclosed to you, you've believed them, you show empathy, but you don't judge the perpetrator because you don't know what the relationship is with them. And the evidence shows if you start to blame the perpetrator, then that actually might stop them communicating with you or even going to get support and services. So it goes something like this. They come to you, I'm so sorry to hear that. That must be awful. I'm really sorry you had to experience that level of violence. Then what you do is you're open, you're honest. What I can do is listen to you and maybe help you to get to your to some support services. I'm a colleague, I can do this. Then what they ask you to do is ask if there's immediate risk. Are you safe? Are your children safe? If they're not, do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Call the police. So you believe them, show empathy, avoid judgment, condemn the violence, not the perpetrator, be open about what you can do. Safety question. Not safe? Police. Let's call the police. Let's do something now. And I imagine, Lex, that at AGPC, the family violence policy empowers that to occur.
Yeah.
If there is no risk, if they say, no, I'm safe, that's the extent of the information, right? You're believing them, right? Provide some options. Do you want to talk to someone about it? You might just need to let them talk for a bit because they might not know what they want to do. Now, managers, one of the things the AGPC policy says is you've got these options available to you. All right? Now, the reason why organisations use EAPs is because they know how to do this, because they are the professionals. Yep. But at all times, the really important thing is to enable the victim to control their decisions. Oh no, we'll go and do this now. We should do this now. Because you've actually got to build a self of self-efficacy, and it's their decision. And then, if they do want to talk to someone, provide accurate referral options. Now, there are many referral options available, but here is the good news. At the end of the day, all you need to know is 1-800-RESPECT. That's the truth, right? If you go into overwhelm and you don't know what to do, safety, no police. Do you want to talk to someone? Let's call 1-800-RESPECT together. 1-800-RESPECT actually has a really good website as well. So as a bystander, if you get a person, first one, believe them. Show empathy. Don't judge, don't blame the perpetrator. Empathise and condemn the violence. I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. That is not right. You're not blaming the perpetrator. You're actually saying that their sense that they are a victim, yes. And you're actually breaking down silos and barriers of isolation. You're creating a very strong connection that we know is one of the barriers to stopping seek helping behaviour, by believing them. Because the perpetrator, one thing perpetrators do is they gaslight, they isolate. If they're not ready to make a decision for power, that's okay. We can check in with them. Any questions on that? Possible, isn't it?
What if someone says that, yeah, I'm safe, we're safe, but because they're just trying to protect the perpetrator?
You don't know that. All you can do is deal with what you're given at that point in time. Now that sucks and it makes it bloody hard, but remember, you can keep checking in. How are you today? I worked with a woman who turned up for work with cigarette burns through her blouses. She did not want to take action. I cannot drag her to the police. She turned up with bruised eyes. There are other forms of it as well. But you can keep checking in and keep in contact. Sorry, Lula.
Yeah, I was just going to say most survivors or most victims are unlikely to want to call the police as the first step. And there are major barriers around reporting because of child protection policies, which do remove children from women who are being abused. as opposed to removing the perpetrator or preventing their abuse. So there are a number of barriers. So I think if just be aware that you can offer that support, and someone's sense of safety might be very different. So know that the victim is the expert of their situation, and they will know what protective behaviours they can employ and what they can do to de-escalate a lot of the time. It doesn't mean that you never call the police. There are going to be circumstances where that is warranted, even if the victim says no. But just do trust that the victim is an expert for their circumstances, and they will understand safety as a relative term as opposed to what we might consider safety to be as an external observer. And I just wanted to come back to that very first point of believing the person. One of the reasons that's so critical is because by simply believing the person, you avoid re-traumatizing them through denial of their situation. And that if in the first circumstance you're a person they disclose to and you choose not to believe them, they're like, I can't remember the exact proportion, but it means they're highly unlikely to disclose again to anyone else. That may shape whether they ever tell anyone else and may keep them silent, hidden, and hence more at risk, more isolated. So that's a really, really, really important step. It avoids re-traumatization. It means the person's more likely to trust others to tell them, which means they're more likely to receiving assistance and having a safe avenue out of that particular situation.
And Lula, I think that also goes to the fact of saying why you avoid judgment and keep that belief going.
And often you'll know the perpetrator. If this is someone disclosing to you, it's probably someone you know, and you probably know the perpetrator. You've probably heard lovely stories about the perpetrator or experienced good times with the perpetrator. That doesn't mean they're not using these behaviours. It doesn't necessarily mean you go from this black and white thinking of, oh, well, they're a good person if they're not using violence. If they use violence, they're absolutely a bad person. We have to shun them. That black and white thinking doesn't help in these highly complex positions. And it's not going to help you as you try and reflect on and understand how someone you know that you like, that is possibly a member of your family or extended family or a trusted colleague, someone you like and love, is being told to you that they are abusing someone. That's a really hard space to sit in. So the more that you can just go away from that idea of good men versus bad men in this area and go, okay, well, I can recognize this as a whole person and they are using abusive behaviors. And the more you know the types of behaviors, you can say, well, that's psychological abuse if they're doing it. Oh, well, it sounds like that's socially isolating you if you're not really comfortable seeing your friends and family. If you've got no one you can call on. Oh, you don't have access to your own income. Okay, well, that's financial abuse. So, you know, if you can name those types of abuse and say that I recognize that as this, as opposed to going, oh, well, he's an asshole or she's just a complete maniac, what a psycho. That's not going to help because the person, it might be their father, it might be their brother, it might be their husband, it might be their long-term partner. There's love still in that relationship. And as we know, when we've all been in long-term relationships or people that we know them to be whole people, we really invest in that person's potential. We want them to be the best that they can be. And so we accept some of the crappiness because, you know, none of us are human, perfect people. And so just be aware that those relationships, although abusive and one person is probably more than others using forms of abuse, it is complex. There is still often love and at least attachment. There's a sense of dependency. So it's really important you name the behaviours and not attack the person.
And similarly, the similar principles, and I'm conscious of time, with perpetrators. So like we said with victim survivors, you believe them. The same thing is true with perpetrators. So someone might come up to you and say, and they might do it different ways. It might be that they say it in a very joking manner, or they might say it seriously to you. I think I'm starting to get more verbally aggressive to my partner. Or they might say, jokingly, but they're disclosing, oh, I had another good yelling match with my partner last night. Really told them what for. Sorry, Lila, I'm just conscious of time. Yeah, sorry, you go.
There's one piece you have to do here, though, that is critical. If they blame the victim, if they say, oh, well, you know what she's like, she provoked me or anything like that, if you buy into that, if you choose to believe that narrative, you're actually reinforcing their own justification of their behaviour. So perpetrator is a very, very tricky thing. So believing them, yes, but not colluding and buying into anywhere where they seek to blame others for their own choice of behaviour. You have to come back to accountability and go, okay, well, sure, you might have been angry. That doesn't mean you got to punch a hole in the wall. I get angry all the time. No holes in my wall. Yeah. So, you know, it's about that as well.
And the step that you employ, you know, because managing collusion is it's something that you can develop at a time. What you do is you just don't minimise or justify the violence. But like we talked about the victim survivors, you want to believe them because you want to keep the communication going. What we know now is that addressing perpetrator behaviours is also about giving people the space to say that that's what they were doing, right? Show empathy. You condemn the use of violence, but not the person, right? So one of the ways that we don't collude, if they say, oh, you know, she was, you know, how she nags me, I'm really sorry to hear that you felt the solution was to use violence in that situation, because you know that's wrong. I'm sorry. Thank you for telling me. Open and honest about your skills and capability, but then you can say, do you want help? 1-800-RESPECT gets you through to Men's Helpline Australia. Men's Helpline has got a website. So what this Our Watch methodology does is it recognises that we've all got an opportunity to be a active bystander when we get a disclosure from a victim survivor, but also when we get a disclosure in whatever form that is from a perpetrator. And that disclosure might come, your radar might go up. So Lex, your fella going up to his brother afterwards and saying, you all right, mate, is a very powerful form of calling out that behaviour, right? Now, in another form, you might call that a managing a disclosure if we're in another situation where it's a very different form of disclosure. You might hear the perpetrator talk about the fact, oh yeah, I give her the money she needs. Might be a form of bystander action, a questioning, but then over time you might be able to say, you know, the response might be in the form of it. But hopefully what we've given you from this session is the opportunity to actually say that doing something, you've got lots of options. But importantly, just listen to that internal barometer. I think what I've heard from everyone here and over the last couple of sessions is just that internal barometer. Keep it true. Keep your true north about what's right and wrong and what's right for humanity. But know that there is evidence about what drives this behaviour, but there is action that we can take as individuals, as organisations and globally. Focus on the people, appeal to people's better instincts is another thing as well, which is what that disclosure process does as well. You can show it's okay in a whole range of ways. But really the taking action, I think, is about starting that conversation, you know, following up. But at the end of the day, I think it's being the change that, you know, you want to see in the world. And what Our Watch says is just do something. And if there's anything we can take away from you today, is to just do something. Colleagues, it's 12:09. I'm very conscious that we've come to the end of today. But what I would really like to do before we go today is if you can go to that QR code again. We're just keen to kind of calibrate if this has been kind of a set of learning that's been helpful for you. You can go to Slido AGPC FV3 or that QR code. We will follow up though from this by sharing with Maristella and Lex the list of resources. But can I be honest, some of them are like this big. So we'll also share the slide deck too. But there are lots of ways, and you might want to do it yourselves to create checklists or check sheets as well. Remember, you've actually got in this session a group of peers that you can go to debrief about any situation. It's an act of learning and it's a skill. But once you have it under your bones, think of it, you know, if you're a new parent, you're always learning. If you're a new worker, you're always learning about that as well. It's another thing that we learn. The only other one that I just keen to kind of this is, you know, do you feel a little bit better now about maybe managing a disclosure? You don't have to be the social worker, the family caseworker. You just need to know how to manage it appropriately. And there's some really good resources out there that you can get to. And, you know, even including it as a resource in your policy settings as well for people to do. And there's also really good YouTubes that you can do and put to as well. Thanks so much, everyone. You're very generous to spend another 10 minutes for us. And I'm so sorry it's taken a little bit longer, but hopefully this has been of value to you. But we'll share everything. But go well, and you're never alone. And we're here at the end of the phone if you need anything as well. Take care, everyone. You're rock stars.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Amazing. What a great group of people.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit more practical than last time, but when we do it in session, all kind of all layers on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Hopefully they came out of it thinking that they actually are doing the right things anyway, and it's just about reinforcing what they're doing already.
Yeah.
It was really good that folk disclose their stories though. That's so important.
Yeah, absolutely, because it makes other people open up too, but it just means we can have that really meaningful discussion then too.
Yeah.